And we're live, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Eco Landscape Mastery Expert Hangout. We are so honored to have our expert today, Javan Bernakavitch. And for now, we want to welcome to the Eco Landscape Mastery Expert Hangout. We are okay. Have our expert today, Javan Bernakavitch. So I want to test the chat and the tech and all that kind of stuff. So if folks could just type in on the chat window there, let us know that you can hear us, that we're coming in clear, make sure that the chat is working, and we'll get going here in just a sec. We'll just make sure that we're all set here. So I just give us a moment to get all that figured out. Okay. Anyone there? Oh, all right. There we are. Hatchet and Seed Edible Landscapes has arrived. Welcome. Excellent. So I'm going to introduce our special guest and then let him take it away. A few years ago, I had the amazing privilege to be down at the Permaculture Voices conference in San Diego, and I gave a talk there. It was it was my first time at that conference, and here was this smiling character, like sitting in the front. And afterwards, Javan came up and gave me a big hug and told me that he liked my presentation. And that was the beginning of what I feel has, become a great friendship. And what I started to learn about Javan after that was that Javan operates he operates from in a permaculture design and business design way that is unique, I believe, in permaculture and in regenerative business. And that is that rather than focusing on the things, rather than focusing just on the project, just on outcomes, Javan helps us focus on, the work we do being aligned with who we are, being aligned with our resources, our context, our way of thinking. And for myself, I've found that this is probably the make or break for any regenerative business and designer, is to develop a process to design in such a way where we are actually our thrivability, our ability to be happy, to have the resources we need to be like in the real world with our work, really hinges upon understanding our context. And I'm going to let Javan really talk about what holistic context is, but just in the few years that I've known you, Javan, you have really helped me widen my point of view, even within my businesses and all the work I do, to include more of my context and more of what is important to me in the work I do. And that's really helped me say no more, which is super important, and to say yes to the things that actually are that help me thrive in my life and my business. So with that, I just want to thank you so much, Javan, for joining us today. And I'm going to give you the floor now.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to speak today. Great to talk with your folks. I'm always inspired, I think is the word, by your work and how you show up. And I'm not easily inspired these days, it seems. So it's rare to find somebody as well put together and just well-rounded. I really appreciate how you bring yourself. So thanks so much. Thanks so much to everybody who's on the call. Great to have everybody here, and pleasure to be speaking with you over the internet as it is. I've been on a full internet education gambit this week, so it's nice to have this as the jewel in the cap. so to speak. My name is Javan Bernakavitch. I run a design company called All Points Land Design, allpointsdesign.ca. I also run a community endeavor called permaculturebc.com, which is a hub to connect permaculturalists within the geopolitical boundaries of British Columbia, which is the westernmost province within Canada. And so that is it's a community-based endeavor. Folks submit events and blog posts, and we connect and just try to make sure that people can connect well in the ecology that's already going on. I also run a couple of podcasts. One's called the Science of Permaculture podcast with Susan Cousineau, which is coming out 2018 in January, and also Uncertified Rational, looking for sanity in a sea of irrationality with Rob Avis. Besides that, I kind of split my time in between life design and land design. So currently working on a 300-acre property and a 106-acre property, and usually work on a full scale evaluation. So I'm usually brought on for not only the design and the watershed conversation, but also now more so the life design aspects, really understanding the context of the people, their businesses, what the possibility is for the businesses within the area they're in, and becoming more from a tip to tip, if you will, design consultation service. The other side of it is life design, which is what Eric was so generous to invite me to talk about today. And life design for me involves many things, but the way that I look at life design, it really comes from a number of questions that clients continually call and ask me about. And first and foremost, it's where am I headed? Or where am I going? Or what's the direction? That tends to be one of the bigger questions. With that question comes, how do I navigate where I'm going? Or how do I make good decisions? How do I chart my course? Then, who am I and how am I best suited to get to where I'm going? Because it's one thing to have a goal, and say Eric and I both have a goal to have an impact, let's say, on the world. Well, Eric is more suited to take a certain number of routes to get to that goal than I am, because of who he is and his experience and his conversation. So that becomes a really big question, you know, what route am I eligible for? And we can talk a lot about eligibility. I think it's probably one of the most important things to talk about in design businesses and regenerative design businesses. And then finally, once we know, where I'm headed, how I'm going to navigate, what are the routes I'm eligible for, what's the gear I need to get there? What's the boots? What's the pack? What's going to actually facilitate my way to get there? Now, along the way, as we're climbing, as we're trying to make it to where we're trying to go, there's problems that come up. There's resistance, there's stumbling, there's fatigue, there's dehydration. And in that, when we're creating our businesses, when we're working internally or externally, there's personal resistance that comes up, the mindset that we have, how we look at the world. And that's really where the med kit comes out, or the attributes of how to hike well, how to get there well, come into being. So those questions, those number of questions, really form the backbone of the life design work. Because 4 or 5 years ago, when I was teaching permaculture design courses, I found a lot of people left a permaculture design course and didn't necessarily put everything into play right away. And there was a number of obstacles. There was, I don't know my direction. I don't know how to navigate. I don't know what I'm good at, who I am, where I'm most eligible to play. I don't know the tools or the techniques or the vehicles to get myself there. And there's always this resistance. More and more, it's the resistance that comes up. And so I started to put in a little bit more life design into the permaculture design course. And that grew and grew and grew until now it's, sometimes it's 50% of the business, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but it's an ever-present conversation because of the number of podcasts I've done with Diego Footer and Creative Destruction. There's a lot of folks internationally who have reached out, and I've worked with folks on all continents now within life design, just helping people to get well situated and really get into the groove of things. So that's been a really fascinating conversation. The tools that I use for that are many tools that most folks will probably have heard of, but they've been highly modified because I'm not necessarily working in the original domain that these tools were used for. So where am I headed? How am I going to navigate? As I was going through this work and starting to pull upon all the different resources that I personally had. Having gone through 20 years of being clinically, chronically, suicidally depressed, I had a number of tools that helped me get through that, mental tools, cognitive tools, mindset tools. But also taking the tools that I had been presented within the regenerative agriculture sphere, within permaculture. And so I had been introduced to holistic management, created by Alan Savory, years ago. And in that, there's an incredible tool called Holistic Context and Decision-Making Framework. And they're not one and the same. Just as we know that the garden bed isn't the entire site plan, holistic context and decision-making isn't all of holistic management. Now, I trained myself in it and used it with a number of students to the point to where I've worked with over 500 people within context, both in group and one-on-one settings, and found that it is one of the most effective decision-making tools and also directional tools that I've been able to come across. Why is that? Well, for those of you that are on the call, you're in the ecological mastery or the eco mastery landscaping program. So you'll have had this situation, or you will in the future, where somebody calls up and they've watched a Jeff Lawton video or they've seen something and they say, I want the permaculture farm. And now the interesting thing about the I want the permaculture farm is it inherently has some biases, some cognitive biases that come with it, i.e. the word permaculture has to be in the farm design or else it's not going to work. What's fascinating about that is that when we start to talk to these people as clients, we start to ask them questions about, well, what is it you want behind this permaculture farm? Well, I want to be close to my kids and I want to have a great life. I want to be really in a healthy place. I want to be close to my food. I want to eat nutrient-dense food. I want to know my neighbors. For those of you that have been farmers or are farmers, you'll know that a lot of those quality of life statements don't necessarily match up with making a farm or living on a farm or being in a farm. So what's interesting is that usually the quality of life that people are searching for isn't necessarily the design solution that they have become infatuated with. And it's my volition that the single most highest value we give to folks as designers is our thinking. If you go to a doctor, 70 to 80% of the value in seeing the doctor is the diagnosis, is understanding the problem, is understanding the cause, the condition, the cofactor, understanding the whole conversation. And the great thing about our field of ecological design, of land design, of immersive design, adaptive design, regenerative design, whatever word is being placed upon it, is that we are so non-domain dependent. We know so many different fields, from the water conversation and all of its many offshoots to the food conversation to the power conversation, that when something happens in one area, we can actually trace the line about how it will affect a number of different areas. And if we don't know completely right now, I think that's really where a lot of designers get to, which means when we come on site, when we do diagnostic work, when we do feasibility work, that's one of the highest level offerings we can give to our clients. And if we go all the way back again to this idea of behaviors and quality of life and how we operate and why we operate, when we start inquiring into our clients, one of the service offerings we can give them is a diagnosis process that includes understanding their goals. And for me, Holistic Context has been an incredible tool that saved myself since use at least $175,000 that I've documented. And for most clients, the average is $45,000 within the first year of use, because it is such an effective decision-making tool. Because instead of life, as it usually does, saying, here's the goal, go for the goal, sacrifice all the quality of life up to it, we actually reverse the two and we say, this is the quality of life. And we're not necessarily going to sacrifice quality of life. We're going to see if goals fit quality of life, sort of like a Venn diagram. So if this is your life or the business you're managing, a decision either overlays a little or overlays a lot. And in that, we can evaluate the effectiveness of a certain decision or action. So that was the first one. That was the first tool within life design that I found incredible results with. And again, I'm evidence-based. It has to work. As a good mentor of mine, Richard Walker, likes to say, it's got to be tasty. If it's not tasty, it gets yanked out of the food forest right away. Love that. That's what happens when you've been doing it for 40 years. You're vicious, ruthless. And that's part of what this is about. It's about creating what's called a ruthless clarity of vision. And a ruthless clarity of vision is interesting because it's kind of like pregnancy. You can't be kind of pregnant, nor can you be kind of in a ruthless clarity of vision. You are in or you are out. And in that, that's why it creates such a great opportunity to actually bring ourselves into a more intentional, aligned way of being, but also do it in a way that is profitable and works for our family and works for the larger goals we have in the world. So that's the first tool. And in that, those two questions, where am I headed and how am I going to navigate, that tool really takes care of it. And I like to think about it as a map and a compass, a way to orient ourselves in where we're going. The second problem I found with a lot of people is, who am I? Am I eligible? Am I not eligible? And when we start talking about eligibility, it takes away some of the frustration of, can I? I think we've gotten to the point now, and the capacities of the human body and the brain and all the rest of it, most of us can learn whatever we want to if we put our minds to it. There's very few things we can't learn. The question is are we eligible for it to start off with? Well, what do I mean by eligibility? I mean, when you were born, there were certain things that you were well gifted with. I was gifted with the ability to speak and take up a lot of space. Not always a good trait to have, and I've learned over a number of failures and a lot of stepping over my bounds and stepping on other people that I have to be careful about that. That's a character trait of myself, that I know I can take up a lot of space, which some people love. They're like, great, put Javan in front. But also when there's a group, I have to be careful to allow all the voices to be heard. So there's a couple of pieces of myself, my DNA, that is important. We learn a lot. We're crafted by our surroundings. And so is some of that DNA or is some of that nurture? It doesn't really matter at this point, but it does come up to the point that we need to know ourselves. And so I turned to permaculture because I had I either heard this from somebody or it came to me. I'm pretty sure I heard somebody say something like brilliant zones at one point. I thought, that's interesting. What if there were zones of brilliance? Just like in permaculture, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 you go to all the time, 5 you don't go to that much. You learn from it a ton, but you don't go there very much. So I started to take a look at this idea that each of us have zones of brilliance, places where I put in 1 unit of energy and I get 10 back. I've been doing a ton of this online teaching lately, and I love this. This is a great forum. Really interactive. I've got a tablet. I do some drawing. Really fun for me. A lot of people hate this type of teaching, and for me, it just works out really well. So I put in a Javan unit of energy into this, and I get 10 Javan units back. I'm super stoked afterwards, and I have a lot of enthusiasm. Folks get a lot out of it. So within that zone of brilliance, you can kind of think of it as a big circle. I divided it into 3. And on one side, we have gifts, talents, the things that we were born with. So Eric's talented in certain areas that I'm not, and I'm talented in certain areas that Eric's not. We have overlapping talents, and we have talents we both don't have. I'm pretty sure we're both not good trapeze artists, although Eric might be holding out on me. I think he probably is.
No, I'm not a good trapeze artist, but what I am is a good juggler.
Well, there we go. There we go. And so in this 3 trifecta of this bullseye, we've got gifts on one area, and then in another area we have passions, things we're excited about. And while I don't believe that follow your passion was good advice, I do believe we should be aware of our passions, because it does indicate subtly directions that we can move towards. And then finally, the third area were problems, because inherently I like solving certain problems more than other people do. And in a recent business design program, during the fires in California, there were a number of program participants who said, I really want to make this part of my business, which is exceptional, because fire prevention is a problem that will only increase as the cognitive choice to not allow forest fires to burn for the last 100 years. We have an inherent problem that needs to be taken care of. So wonderful, not everybody wants to solve that problem. And so we've got gifts, we've got passions, and we've got problems. And in that, we have a sort of a center of things that are closer to that. And that then overlays with opportunities in your local area. And so that was a way for me to really help people understand the routes that they were inherently eligible for. One of the things I don't know if other people have taught or have been in courses, especially in a permaculture design certificate, there's always about 3 or 4 at the end of a PDC, and they're always like, I'm going to be a food forester. You're like, that's great. How many trees have you planted? None. Okay. Is this your first design course? Yes. What's your previous experience? I've worked in a desk job my entire life. Okay, well, you're definitely eligible for enthusiasm, but you're going to have to build more eligibility for this business by starting to practice and ply your trade.
Well,
and so
hey,
part of it.
I just have to jump in there real quick, because when I took my first PDC, at the end of the PDC, I went up to my teachers, and the town where I live, Sebastopol, it's maybe about 8,000 people. And I said, I'm leaving here and I'm going to go design a permaculture city in my town, the whole thing. And the next day I went down to the planning department and I got everything they would give me about the ecosystem and the traffic plans and all this stuff. And I got this whole stack of stuff. I came home. I'm gonna do a permaculture design for the whole city. And then, you know, about maybe a couple hours into starting to scratch the surface on that, I'm like, yeah, I think I'll just start a community garden instead.
I love that. That really comes with the adage of start where you're at. And that's a great, incredible one. I really appreciate that. Thanks, mate. So Zones of Brilliance really talked about the routes that you were going to take towards your final destination that you were eligible for, the things you really wanted to go out and do and you were more suited to do than others. And in that, I found even more so the places where I can play and play well. And then because we live in a world that is based upon exchange, and we have since Homo sapiens came about and were genetically stable upwards of 250,000 years ago. And then the cognitive revolution, maybe 60 to 70,000 years ago, when we really started to use the prefrontal cortex. Numbers, of course, vary depending on who you speak to. Then we got into this interesting place of how do we exchange and how do we exchange well? So, you know, how do we actually get there? What are the techniques, the tools, the technical aspect? What are the boots I'm going to wear? How is that going to take me there? And in many ways, business offers a great opportunity to take us where we want to go. If I put on a certain pair of boots, I can traverse more mountainous, talus slopes, rocky areas on the east slopes of the Canadian Rockies where I was raised. If I take a lighter approach, if I go for sort of a ultra lightweight backpacking, I have to wear certain shoes, but I have to be more careful. So the shape and the design of business really became a big portion of the work I did with people. Because one, most people had never been taught about business or what's it about or how to do it. And two, the shape of the business is really fascinating. I'm a big fan of Total Immersion Swimming by Terry McLaughlin. And there's this great conversation that Terry was in a conference and he was ready to change his direction. He was going to start finding high-paying Olympian clients. And he was listening to an instructor, and one of the instructors said, the shape of the vessel is more important than the horsepower. And that really struck him. And as I heard it, that really struck me. And in the idea that the shape is more important than the horsepower, it's true. If you take a look at the shape of a vessel as it goes through a fluid dynamic, it's actually the shape that's more important, because that actually infers the amount of horsepower that's necessary to drive the shape through the water. And the shape of a business, how it's designed and created, and the tools and the pieces is an incredibly important piece, one that very few people think about. So business design started to become a big portion of what I did. And I did a lot of one-on-one work and a couple of workshops. But recently, Rob Avis of Verge Permaculture and Adaptive Habitat and I put together the Regenerative Business Design program specifically to help people in business, in a business conversation, consultants primarily, consultants and designers. And then we've had farmers and we've had small scale food producers. And what else have we had? We've had a musicians coach helping musicians get off the music label, which I love. It's kind of like getting off drugs. We've had a power consultant, so a solar consultant. We've had a construction installer, mostly does vinyl siding, and wanted to kind of change the way he was doing his business. Lots of really fascinating folks. And so that became one of the ways that we could reach a wider audience. And we just completed the most recent Regenerative Business Mentorship Program on Friday. And then finally, that last piece of what do we do when frustration comes up against us? What do we do when I'm not worthy to be here? I shouldn't be doing this work. I can't charge anything because I'm not valuable as a human, which happens to all of us. I haven't talked to one person who hasn't come up against that at some point in their career, or when they level up and they start doing different portions of the work within their career as a designer. And so that really became a number of tools called the tools of sovereignty, or mindset strengthening, or a lot of limiting belief work. I had a farming couple call me almost a year ago, actually, a year and 2 months ago. And they asked me if I would take a look at their farm business because it was failing, and they had a friend who had worked with me and had pretty good results. And so I got on the phone with him and we started talking. It became really apparent really quickly that the relationship was the issue. And what's fascinating about that is if you're a designer or an evaluator or an assessor and you come into a business, and as you're assessing just on a phone call, and we can do it quite quickly, we start hearing what's going on and you see the signs on the wall. Very quickly we get to a place where, okay, this has nothing to do with the business, this has to do with the people. So as I told them, I said it would be disingenuous and dishonest of me to take any money from you and to work on this business evaluation when inherently it's the relationship itself. So you'd be paying me to rearrange furniture in a burning house. So why don't we work on the limiting beliefs instead? Why don't we work on the things we expect of each other and we interact with each other about? And so we did. We worked for about 6 months, and pretty stunning results. They actually did the business evaluation themselves to understand at the end of their work if it was valuable. So we did limiting belief work and we did holistic life context work, which was pretty fascinating. So really, when we talk about these 4 areas, we're talking about getting a map, getting a compass, good direction, good decision making. Secondarily, zones of brilliance, knowing who we are internally so we know which routes we're most eligible for, the routes that we can take and not falter too badly on. There's always going to be days that are frustrating. Taking a look at problems and gifts and all those things that we enjoy. Problems are important because, as a friend of mine likes to say, in business, especially entrepreneurship, everyone has to eat a shit sandwich at some point. You just have to find a sandwich you actually enjoy eating, which if the analogy makes you gag a bit, it's a good sign. That's the point of it, to make you really understand the conversation. And then we get into business design, really good business design that isn't based upon business plan, but based upon business models, about principles that you can actually apply, not recipes, but principles that we can apply and have direct feedback and direct evidence quickly. I'm a big fan. If it's not producing quickly, there's an issue there. And then finally, the med kit, when we come up against resistance, how do we work with it? So those are the 4 areas I've worked with mostly with life design. I work predominantly these days with my contemporaries who found out what I do and they want to level up. And it's been great to work with folks like Darren Doherty and that crew and a number of other folks, and just learning that we all have these same issues. And it's been just such a pleasure to speak about that. And Eric and I have had a number of great conversations just in the wider world about how this applies and how we align ourselves. And I can't speak highly enough of Eric and his work and just the intent from which he comes with. So little panagerizing, that's what it's all about.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah. So yeah, that kind of gives an introduction to the life design work. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted, Eric, before we go into Q&A, but I find Q&A is always more valuable than me prattling on for hours on end.
Well, one thing I would love to get, I want to capture it here in the chat, is nice. Just because you went through those 4 different pieces that that you've been working with, and then you kind of described each one. Well, could you just kind of rattle off what each one is, and then we'll all be able to see it together?
Yeah, for sure. So really, if we take a look at the question, I'm going to write this down as we go. So there's a direction question, there's a decision question, and then from that, we work with something called holistic life context and decision making. And that creates the map and compass. So
are you writing it in the chat, Javan?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat there. So that's the first one. So I don't know if
perfect.
you want to copy that to the YouTube or what.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay, I'll do that. Great.
And then the next one is, who am I, as a question, and what am I eligible for? And we're gonna, thank goodness for autocorrect and spelling. And so in that, zones of brilliance comes about as a tool. The natural gift assessment comes out as well. Assessment is definitely the way you spell it. Also, beliefs assessment comes into play. And that's really getting a sense of the roots. So the ways that are going to get you to where you want to go. Next, the question is, what are the tools, the techniques, what's the technical aspect? So how do I actually get there? How do I exchange with every step and bring myself higher? What's the exchange look like? And so in that, the regenerative business mentorship and also regenerative business design tools came into play. And a couple tools I found really, really fascinating and exceptional is business model generator and value proposition, two exceptional tools that I think folks would really enjoy to take a look at. And that's really the boots. It's the boots on the ground. And then what do I do when I'm slowing, when I'm stuck, when I'm stagnated on this journey? Well, part of that has to do with mindset fortification or mindset strengthening, which just is incredible, the amount of people that I work with on this, because so much of this was not taught in school, and this is really where a lot of folks have said this is the point of where this is valuable. And I'm struggling to spell strength at the end of the day here. Mental strengthening, there we go. I think I still didn't get it right. Maybe it did help me. Great. So mental strengthening.
We won't mark you off for that.
No, well, hopefully not. As I tell many students before I start, I'm not a speller. And if you've come to critique my spelling, it's going to be a full-time occupation. You're better off just going with education and then limiting beliefs work. And this is really the med kit, and also just good practices as you're going along, just like keeping your eye on the horizon and lifting your feet, and just lots of good pieces there. So there's those 4 pieces if you wanted to copy them over there, Eric.
Great. Done it. Done.
Done and done. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so, wow, there's so much in there, you know, and I think that it can be, here, let's see, I'm going to change our format here for a sec. So
sure, mate.
Yeah. So there's so much in here that Javan has shared with us. It's, as we like to say, it's like the deep dive, right? And so what I would just ask, I would ask folks who are here now watching, you know, what's come up for you in listening to Javan? Are there places in your business right now on a project where you feel stuck, where you feel out of alignment, where I think one thing that I noticed that has happened for me in starting my business and growing my business is that I'll go down these different paths. And I don't know, Javan, if this is the kind of thing you've experienced. I'll go down a path and I'll think, you know, I'll get excited by a project, let's say, and I'll say, oh, that project will grow my business. I'm going to turn this vineyard into an ecological vineyard. And I'll see all the benefits and potentials of you know, having a big project, of leaving a legacy, of creating a demonstration model for the area, of making good money, of being able to hire more folks. And I get kind of stuck on all of these, I get kind of stuck on all the you know, this vision, this idea of what's possible there. But then what happens is that the client maybe doesn't share the same kind of values I do of the land. Maybe they're just doing it because they think it's going to bring them more money. They're trying to get on the green train or something, you know? And so I've had these experiences over the last decade where I'm rabbit holed into a project that I think is going to change my business, going to change my life. And then I find I'm just miserable. And I've put a lot of resources towards this, you know, and a lot of energy. And so a few things that I think some of what you've shared and in my own learning around sort of my own context is when to differentiate between making a decision that is truly aligned with my context versus making a decision that I think is going to explode my business. Like how do we, you know, what are some tools or ways about that we might look at that? So that's just sort of like one question. And then the other one that I'll just throw out there is, you know, there's a lot about confidence. You brought up confidence a few times. You talked about undervaluing yourself. And I think that a lot of folks, when they start out in the ecological landscape company, kind of in the ecological landscape business, we often don't charge enough. We're afraid to talk about money with clients. We're afraid to value ourselves. And I've even experienced too, especially when I was younger, that I knew I had some really powerful tools that I could share with my clients. But when somebody didn't align with me, when another contractor was like, what, you can't do that. That doesn't make sense or whatever. I would, there's a little part of me that would believe them, and my confidence that would just sort of like shrink. So there's a little bit of fodder in there for you.
There's a lot in there. Kind of the entire ecosystem. It's kind of there's a lot. I think one of the first things you brought up is permaculturalists, regenerative agriculture folks, folks who just see the writing on the wall. We're more prone to shiny thing-initis than probably anybody else I know. We've already gone through some sort of inspirational, revitalizing, oh, I've had our moment, our end of suburbia moment, our beginning of ecology moment, and everything looks bright and shiny, and I want to do everything. I want to be everything to everybody. And one of the major problems, I was just doing a Rex training on holistic context, and one of the major problems in this field is the savior complex, is the one that I'm going to save, I'm going to improve, this is going to change the world. And so inherently we externalize, we outsource our joy by saying, I will be happy if these people applaud, if this has a certain effect. And the problem with that is constantly outsourcing your joy, constantly outsourcing your sense of fulfillment, constantly outsourcing your sense of being worthwhile, ensures you will constantly never be any of those things. And I would say that's probably the number one thing I come up with my colleagues when I'm working with them, is that they think this is the case. They think, well, I'm helping others. And so we're working with this one client, large, 350,000 grossing a year, ecological landscape designer down in the States. And they're saying, well, how do I push bigger? How do I have more clients? How do I do all this? And the question then becomes, okay, well, what's your weak link in your business? Is it time with your family? Is it the inflow? If it's the promotion, is it the technical aspect of grinding out the work? Is it the reputation? Is it the sales call? Like what's the weak link? And they say family. Okay. So logically, if we run this through, and if you end up picking up a bunch more jobs, is family going to improve or not improve? Oh, it's not going to improve. And then you kind of have this moment where you kind of see their face going, oh. And again, these are tracks. These are programmed tracks in our mind that are going bigger, better, buck. Same problem that got us into overshoot right now. Like, got to go bigger, got to go stronger. And so you take that programming from an inherently unsustainable, toxic society, and then you plug it into a bunch of folks, even though we think we're not at issue anymore for that thinking. We all are, by the way. And you run on that, and all of a sudden you're in a place where I have to make this demonstration site. Well, does it work for the business? Does it work for the family? Does it work for you? And I've been in a number of situations with this, with colleagues and collaborators. Specifically, the big one I can think of is we had the opportunity to take on a 10,000 square foot homes, quote unquote, eco landscape, because there was an innovative solution that one of my co-designers had come up with. And, it's, 10 to 15% of a build cost is roughly the landscaping cost, including installation, all the rest of it. And this was a $500,000 installation. And when we ran it through the context, when we really said, we're known for ecological design, we love our clients, we can hug our clients, all the way down the list, it just failed. Just failed and failed and failed and failed and failed. And so one of us said, but we should do it. The money's good. Yeah, but money isn't an issue right now. Yeah, but money's always the issue. Yeah, but it isn't right now. So off they go. We decide to go ahead with it, even though we did the context decision-making, made the decision, documented it. 3 months later, we came back to context. We do what's called a spot check or an enterprise audit. And sure enough, things are failing hard. And so we test two decisions: continue with client, don't continue with client. It's like, just like the two graphs were stark. And so we stop working with the client, everything's better for it. And we really kind of check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, which was really what was happening. And this is the big conversation. I was invited to be on the Permaculture Institute of North America at 3 years into my work. I was like, oh my goodness, like these people are, 20, 30 years my senior in experience, 20, 30 years my age, a senior in my age. And I was so excited, but it meant 12 extra hours in front of my computer a month. And so the ego was just like, yay. And then the context, which is great. And that's why I like context, because it inoculates us against the cognitive biases and the starward emotions that would like to drive us in a certain way. And it was one of those great decisions where I was like, oh, I'm so flattered. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. But the answer is no, which they were quite surprised at. But to this day, it's still a really good decision. I don't want to spend any more time on my computer. I spend enough time. So, those things are really important in making those good decisions. If you don't have a system for designing your life, then somebody else will design it for you. And this is true about everything. The way you think about money, the way you do your work. We all take these programming pieces from our family, from our friends, from our mentors. And if you haven't actively thought about that and thought about, does that actually work for me as a person, then you're just operating somebody else's belief system. And because they are not you, it is inherently not a good fit on some level for you. It's worked good enough until now. You're still alive, but it's probably not the best fit. So I think what you've brought up here, Eric, is a really important piece.
Wow. Well, that's, that is some key stuff, and some great lessons in there. And we do have a couple of questions here. So Anne has asked the question, what do you say to yourself when you're asked to do a project that your confidence level is low and experience is not lots, but you can do it with research and asking colleagues?
Oh, you mean what do I do on every project?
Is this a fake it till you make it situation?
I'm not a great fan of fake it till you make it. Because inherently in it is the conversation of, I still don't know, right? Like even the saying of that, the programming of that fake it, it's like, I'm still the imposter. And there's this whole psychological neuroses of the imposter syndrome, and it's pretty involved. And I hear you completely. There's actually a really good design. I think I'll do my first screen share here, just so I really give you a sense of how this works for me. So Eric, can you see the screen there?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Anne, great question. And I just want to demonstrate how I look at design. So just want to make sure that's right, isn't it? So design starts over here, and it's all over the place. There's so much complexity. We're kind of learning, we're growing, and over time, over our process, and that's the most important thing in all of this, is really to get a good process down. With the complexity lessens and relax and kind of gets down, and on it goes. And so you can think about this in terms of design. There's a lot of pieces here in design, but you can think about this generally, how I look at design. And so this portion here is the, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? And this is the same thing on every project. Every single project I do, I'm just like, okay, there's something about this I don't know. And what happens next in this next period of time is the piece where we start to take a lot of that complexity and we start to reduce it so it becomes sort of manageable chunks. And then we take that and then we downstep it again to certain systems. And then we get somewhere here, we usually get a working plan. And then of course the system moves on and moves on. So I start here because I just want you to know that this moment up here, this moment right here is always the same. It's always like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I've just done. So part of that, I think this is an important piece for everyone to keep in mind, is that we all come into that. We all come into that moment of like, what have I done? I'm not too sure. I need to be careful. And what most people mistake lack of confidence for is lack of competence. And this is an extremely important point that I wish I had learned years ago, is that this is actually about having better competence and about having systems and processes. So that way, let's say you get a job, and as you go through your evaluatory diagnostic to understand their problems and all the rest of it, there's 4 or 5 areas where, okay, I'm not super competent here, I'm not super competent here, I'm not super competent here. as happens in all jobs. And at that point, it's like, who am I going to bring in to facilitate that and facilitate my own learning? So when I started out, I knew nothing. I had a PDC. I was an urban guy, raised in urban settings, did a lot of outdoor camping and recreating. And when I took my first PDC, I knew nothing. And so I created an education company that would host courses. And in that, I would bring in more expert people to facilitate the majority of the technical teaching. And in that, I got invitations to work with certain projects. Gord Baird of EcoSense is a great example. So I brought Gord in to teach on these PDCs and also bring folks to tour his property. And in that, I got invited to work with him on gray water design was a good one. And I passed a bit of work as a greenhouse over to him, and I got a chance to do some plastering with him. So it was a way for me to create connectivity. So the internal dialogue when I work, and getting specific to your question, the internal dialogue is actually a front-loaded piece of conversation, which is, okay, how am I going to approach this? Because I know I don't know everything. So who are the people I'm going to tap? Who are the conversations I'm going to have with? And how am I going to integrate those so I can actually learn more and I can build on my competency as I go forward into the future? So hopefully you're taken away from that. There's very few jobs I think that anybody takes that they know everything about. Learning is probably the biggest benefit in these jobs, this occupation that we've taken on, because every single project we learn. We get paid to learn about the ecology of the site. We get paid to learn about new specific plants. We get paid to learn about specific problems that client faces. I think the other thing there, and is to really ensure that you have really good tools of sovereignty, really good decision-making protocols, and really understand about where you're headed and what you're doing. So that way when the road gets rough, not if, there's this great diagram of the life of an entrepreneur, and it's like, oh, things are going great. Oh, I'm the worst thing in the world. Oh, this feels really awesome. Oh, like over and over. That's part of it being an entrepreneur, because we were raised thinking that steady state employment was a good idea. But if truthfully, the book of nature is open for us to learn from the prime mover, well, nature has no constantly employed employees. There's always boom and bust cycles. There's always hunting and relaxing or resting. There's this ebb and this flow. So constant employment in and of itself is a non-mimicked human creation, which I don't think has actually worked very well for any of us. So part of it is just really starting to understand that conversation and how it plays out.
Well, and I would just add too that it's, I talk about it in the course in the student portal, that there's this expansion and contraction that happens in all of our businesses and all of our projects. And that is a natural pattern. And there's a sense of that when your business is in a contraction phase, when we're feeling like we need to get that next client. And often when you're feeling that desperation to get the next client, there's a few things going on. One, there's a scarcity mindset happening. Two, often you're more likely to grab onto any old client that comes along, which may or may not fit your context. And you may not even end up making money because, getting involved with some clients can actually lead to a loss over time. And what I've sort of discovered over the years is that those contraction times are those moments where I get to actually design my company, where I get to touch in with holistic context, when I get to develop that next program, develop that next marketing campaign, develop that next, social engagement plan. And so now I start to embrace those contraction. Now, I mean, there's a real money thing, right? If you don't have money and you don't have a job coming in, obviously you want to pay the bills and stuff like that. And there's workarounds during those slow times that we can talk about in the Q&A on Friday. If anyone's interested, I'll be doing a Q&A with y'all on Friday, and we can talk about the business line of credit. We can talk about how to keep the business afloat during the slow periods. But those, those contractions are important. And now I really embrace them as the vital design time that I get now to actually design my business. Because there's two different things. You're either working in your business or you're working on your business, right? So if you're out there designing a project or you're implementing a project, you're working for your business. If you're in the back, if you're a step back and you're designing what's my business going to be like in a year from now, and you're setting goals, and you're touching into your context, then you're working on your business, actually designing your business itself. So, we can't be afraid of those contraction moments. And then I just wanted to add one more thing to Anne's question, and then I think we have another couple questions here. Is that I think bringing in those colleagues, right? If you feel like a project is a little bit beyond your scope, but it's in alignment with, a good relationship with the client, something you're excited about, you're being led by passion, but it feels aligned with your mission, then I think that you can confidently step into a project with a team to help fill in any gaps that you have. And I know I talk a lot about this in the course, that having a strong network of professionals, how important it is to develop those relationships with professionals and be able to bring them into your project so that you can fill in those various gaps. And then the beauty of it is that you get to learn from your colleagues. You get to learn from these folks you're bringing in, and you're going to have that much more confidence and competence when you move on to the next project.
Yeah, really, really good points all. A few things to add. Recently, we had a RBM student, regenerative business mentorship student from the summer, who took a point about that Rob and I are very risk averse. We don't like a lot of risk. We don't like a lot of variability. One of the great thinkers in this is Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and his work on Anti-Fragile, his books Anti-Fragile, Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, The Bed of Procrustes. And so when we take a look at a lot of these businesses, the conversation for us is actually, you need to be in a place, if you're going to do really good work, so that way you're equanimous. You are of equal mind when you're pitching a job or you're working on a job, because you want it to be in your best interest and you want it to be in the client's best interest. And now, if there's a need for money, that's always going to drive the business conversation, and consciously and unconsciously, you're going to push the job into being. And many jobs are not a good fit for us. I would say, at least for me, at least 50% of the jobs I've done in the past weren't a good fit. Now, if you don't have supplemental income, that's going to be a problem, especially as a designer. And so one of the gentlemen in the program was coming into the fall, knew the fall was slow, so he took a job at a nursery. He said, build skill, right? It'll build repute. I'll know more. Took a part-time job. And because he had implemented so many of the practices that we had delivered, within 3 weeks, they were, what was the email? They were busier than they had ever been. And the potential for profit from these 4 or 5 jobs was eclipsed what they had made in the company 3 years previously. And so having what we call FU money to really say, okay, we're going to give everything we can to this business, but I also don't want to be pushing myself into a place, has been really important, and something that I wish I had learned early on. I was definitely in dire straits when I started, and I don't think it pushed me towards the right decisions all the time. So yeah, great conversations about extra funding. I appreciate that. And then what was the second point you were talking about there? I got so excited about that first one. Anyways, there's lots of good pieces.
Okay, let's get to a few of these other questions here.
Sure.
So we've got maybe a simple question. We're looking for some books, reading resources to read over winter holidays that relate to regenerative businesses, innovative thinking, strategic planning. Any recommendations for that, Javan?
Yeah. So again, I would say, and it's pretty easy to take a look at if you go through, and there's a bunch of books I digested years ago about how the 5-year plan is dead and it's actually not malleable enough to get motion and get moving, which I found with a number of the clients I was working with. So I moved to more of a principles-based approach. I moved towards thinkers that could create really good thoughts in one domain, transfer it to a number of other domains, and still have the principles be quite forthright. So in that, I dove pretty deep into Anti-Fragile and Taleb's work. I dove pretty deep into the E-Myth Revisited, which I think is, and the E-Myth, which are 2 exceptional books if you haven't read. I dove pretty deep into Lean, and the Lean Farming book I think is a For me now, it's a non-negotiable for farming clients. It has to be on their bookshelves. It's a part of the consultancy at this point, which is kind of fun. Anything about lean mentality in the Kaizen school of business, Kaizen meaning constant improvement from Japanese, I think is an important one. In terms of strategic direction and processes, I would say probably blue ocean strategy and now blue ocean shift. Number of folks in permaculture don't work with one of the most important principles within regenerative business mentorship, which is you have to differentiate. You have to be different. You have to show people why you are in a blue ocean, i.e. there's no blood in the water, versus a red ocean where there's a lot of competition. And the differentiation, also called niching, allows you to really hone in on the gifts, the talents, the skills that you really like to bring and become known for that. I'm just going to pop back over to the question because there's a few other pieces there related to regenerative business, innovative thinking. Yeah, so the 5 or the 6 thinking hats by the person who, I forget his name all of a sudden, but he coined the term lateral thinking. That was an incredible thinking book. Your Brain at Work by David Rock. That's probably the one I would recommend most if you're having problems with cognition or just like doing the thing at the right time. That's an amazing book for understanding when to prioritize, when to work, when to do the hard work of the week, which is a pretty important one. And strategic planning. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Business Model Generator. I'm a big fan of Value Proposition by the same folks. Landscape Format books, really beautiful. Really good books within that. And I would say those are my go-to. I'm thinking about the shelf in my library, and it's massive with a bunch of business books I've never read again. But those would be the ones that I really come back to time and time again, because again, I'm moving more in a principles approach. So great question. Thank you.
That's great. And I would say that the first time I read the E-Myth, that I don't love everything about the value system in there, but that really lit me up and gave me a new understanding of business and entrepreneurship and how I see myself in my business. And that was that was a kind of a life-changing business book for me. So moving on to some more of the questions here. What are some key questions to ask landscape clients to help them figure out what they want? Like if you're like, how do we here at the Elm School, how do we become, how do we help our clients work towards their holistic context and it help inform our projects in such a way that we can design towards that?
So again, in a front-loaded way, first and foremost, if your business isn't situated around a problem you love solving, this is going to be difficult because it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. It's going to be exceptionally difficult to do. And when you do, it's going to be a bit of a mess. So unless you're in a business where you exceptionally love solving the problem, this is probably a stepping stone business versus the final business. This is not your final form, so to speak. There's a bit more evolution to go through. And the second piece there is after you love solving the problem, you better love your clients. Because if you don't love your clients, it's going to get very tedious very quickly. So on, what day are we today? Monday. On Saturday, my clients were in town. And so I went over and the way I work, I have the ability to be on site a number of times. And so I've been on their site maybe 5-6 times. And they don't have a cast iron frying pan or a roasting pan. Like all of the amazing food I brought to cook with, I had to find makeshift solutions. They're urbanites, that's fair, that's fine. But that transgressed something deep within me. So I quickly went off, bought a roasting pan, bought a cast iron frying pan, and dropped it off at their place on Saturday and just said, it's sacrilege not to have this. So you guys should have this. And of course we hugged and we had a great conversation and it was just beautiful and brilliant and all the rest of it. And so, really do find the clients you love to work with and wait for them. It's kind of like waiting for the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. For most of our designs, we're working with them for 3, 6, 9, 12 months because of the scope and the scale. So first, pre-front load, make sure you've got all that together.
And have a cast iron frying pan if you invite Javan over for dinner.
Right, exactly. Whereas I'm never coming back. And then secondly, have a process of integration. So, I like to think about our businesses as houses or homes that we invite people into. And, there's the signage, there's everything around us that brings people in. And so part of that conversation, if you can, part of that conversation that you put out there should help to start funneling or filtering people. Everybody that comes to our business is a yes, a maybe, or no. And hopefully it's the static content job to filter those people without any more time on your end. I don't know if anybody's had a conversation with a total no, but it's one of the most painful conversations because they're a no the moment they get on the phone. And so part of it is having good content that filters people. So having content that asks question on my contact form at allpointsdesign.ca, you'll see, have you read the good fit section? You go to the good fit section, you go through it, and you can kind of see, oh, okay, that's what this guy's about. Now you may think you're already pruning people. The conversion rate of people who call me and hire me is 98%. The number of people who call me is low compared to my colleagues' rate, but the people I do spend the time on the phone with hire me. So it's an interesting piece about finding good fit. I think that's a really important conversation. Then we have a good fit call. And in the good fit call, I ask 4 very important questions. I ask, what's your situation? And they get to tell me the story. Now, for most of us, the story isn't the context, but it gives us a sense of who they are, which gives us a sense of how their context is laid out. What's your situation? What brought you to the call today? That's a great question. That always pulls out a ton. And love listening to your clients. If you love your clients, you're going to start listening to them and you're going to ask them questions like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me a bit more about, oh, I'm curious about that. Tell me more about that. And the picture starts to unfold. I use a note-taking app called Evernote. I take copious amounts of notes. I make sure it's well tagged. So whatever we do in the future, I can always go back, see it. Good to go. I use the free version. Still on the free version 10 years later. Great. So I do that. I ask the situation. Next, I ask, what is the specific problem you're calling for me to help you solve? And this is exceptionally important because this is the conversation. If I'm along Avenue A and you're coming up Avenue B, we have a moment of intersection. After I continue and after you continue, what's changed? What's different? What's improved? And if you go into value proposition, you realize this is gain and pain points. And there's never been a business more specific to that idea than ecological landscape design, because people have things they want solved or they're looking for an idea of something, right? There's the kind of the two pieces like, the water's a problem and I want a place that I'm happy to be in. Okay, well, that's 2 different pieces. And then when people say something ambiguous like happy, it's like, interesting, what does happy mean to you? Like, what would be the conditions that would make you happy in this space? Situation, what's the problem? Next is, what's the cost? What's been the cost of these problems not being solved for you in this situation? So what's been the cost? What's the cost currently, and what do you project the cost to be in the future? Speaking with a client that had a water issue, and that water issue was costing them every single year $15,000. It had been going on for 10 years. That's 150. Currently, it's 15, and it would only increase into the future. So, there was a sense of what this problem's cost was. And then finally, implication, needs payoff. Why are you doing this? Like, what's on the other side? And that's kind of asking all the same questions in a different way to understand what's the problem, but also what's the benefit. And in that, I've heard more situations and understandings from my clients than anything else. So what's the general situation? What's the problem you're facing? Supplicant question to that is, what are the obstacles to you personally solving that problem? So already you're starting to get a sense of what those problems diagnosis are. And then implication, what's the cost to you, your family, financially, etc. And then what's on the other side? Why do you want to engage somebody in this work? And that's really helped me to distill what's going on for a client better than anything else. I've been through every questionnaire, mostly because I'm collaborative in nature. So I've used questionnaires and conversations that folks have passed on to me over the years. Taylor, you passed me a great one years ago. I've used Jude Hobbs. I've used, I've been through at least 12 of them, and nothing has been as effective as asking those 4 questions and variants of them.
Well, that is, wow, that is so valuable. And everybody, I put those 4 questions in the chat there, so you can copy them down if you missed it. And of course, you can always come back and watch the replay of this. And I wanted to add something in there. I mean, that kind of intake and vetting is so powerful. And one thing I've been learning, and in a future session I'll share a lot more with everybody about this, is this business approach called the ask method. Have you come upon the ask method, Javan? Okay, so
No.
what's so cool about this is it automates how you ask clients questions. What it does is it helps you put clients into different buckets or segmentation. And there's a few different softwares. I just found a really good one that was like cheap or free that you could put on your website. But essentially, when somebody goes onto your website, if they're going to opt in, say, to get some free content, or they're going to send you a consultation form, or if you have something on your website that's interactive, then you can have this little survey in there, and it can be set up in a way where it doesn't take a ton of time. But what this little survey does is it helps segment your audience or your clients into 3 or 4 different groups. And as they get segmented into those different groups, it takes some time, but you literally develop a conversation and content for each one of those different groups. So we have an issue at the Permaculture Skill Center that we've had for a while, which is that sometimes we've had these long-term programs, and those programs are very broad, right? Like the Ecological Landscape Immersion program, that was our in-person program. We're not running that one anymore, but it was so broad. It weaves in social permaculture and landscape contracting and farming and ecological design and business development and all these things. Well, one of the things that we discovered was that at any one time, at least half of the class wasn't happy because it wasn't the thing that they were most interested to learn about. So here it was, they showed up, but now we're talking about social permaculture, and here's somebody who just wants to start their business and they maybe don't see the value of it or whatnot. And so as we've gone through, like what I've been learning and experiencing as well, it's actually going to be a more effective learning experience if you're able to segment your groups in such a way where you know what people are looking for, and then you can funnel them towards the content that they're really going to get a lot out of, rather than trying to stuff everybody together and give everybody the same exact canned stuff that isn't always isn't necessarily what everybody wants all the time. So anyways, I'll share more about this in another Q&A about the ask method and how you can set up these different segmentation funnels, is what it's called. It's a really powerful business tool that gets people, people are showing up for something in particular, and if you can lead them towards that, you'll have better conversion that way.
That's great. So what's been the result in putting together the ask for you and your business now?
Well, I'm just in the process of doing it. So I'm super inspired. I'm seeing the need, because we've had a few years where the same issues keep coming up. So I really see the need. And I'm starting to understand more. I mean, we originally had a segmentation where you've got our farm school programs and you've got our landscape programs. So that was like an initial segmentation. But then within that, we were just so broad that that it caused issues. And what our solution is now next year, all of our in-person programming, which, by the way, everyone who's in the Elm School, you're all going to have forever discount rates for any in-person course that we run at the Permaculture Skill Center in Sebastopol, California. And what we'll be doing is we'll be just having very focused an intensive on irrigation, an intensive on earthworks, an intensive on design, an intensive on plant propagation. And so that way, if you're already a master with earthworks, you feel super confident, you don't feel like you want to learn more, but you're really excited to learn irrigation systems, you don't have to sit through stuff that you already feel confident in just to get the stuff that you wanted to learn. You can just really focus in. So that's how we'll be kind of switching that up next year to really kind of understand more about our audience and what people want. Now I feel like Jesse had a really great question in here. Do you see this? You see this question here, Javan? You want me to read it out to you?
I do, or I can read it, either or.
Okay. So Jesse, this is an excellent question, which I think really hits to the heart of this. And so Jesse asks, what are some methods for dialing in on your own holistic context? In other words, what you really want to do as opposed to what you think you should do or what you see others doing. And just before I give it over to Javan to answer that, I just want to say that I think a lot of us end up feeling like this. Like we see what other people are doing and we think, gosh, that looks successful, that I want to do that. That's exciting. And then sometimes you get into it and you're like, you know what? I don't know if this is a good fit. And then so I'm speaking for myself. So I'll go from thing to thing. And I think it's probably because I hadn't developed enough of that holistic context. So passing it over to you, Javan.
So great question, Jesse. Something that I've dealt with a number of times. I think part of it is that when you develop a context, you're actually developing states of being. And when you test certain decisions, certain jobs against, you get a sense of if they're actually going to fulfill the state of being. And that in and of itself inoculates you against doing what you think is a good idea. So having a process, using the process, testing the process, and innovating with the process. So having times where you sit and you reflect upon. So I look at context during the summer solstice, the 2 equinoxes, and then into New Year's, Judeo-Roman New Year's. And having time to reflect, I don't care if it's weekly or monthly or whatever, it's a really important piece. And I schedule big breaks of my time twice a year. I schedule short breaks of my time. I schedule things called workcations, where I spend 2 or 3 days working on one thing and one thing alone. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm doing. And further to that, I spend a lot of time at the beginning of my week. If you read David Rock, you'll get to this. Beginning of my week, the prefrontal cortex is at its highest capacity for working on prioritization and long-term thinking. So what I do is I've got a little manual schedule here, just put it together for the week. And it's basically just the week of the year, my schedule for the week, my major priorities, what I'm working on. And I like using hard copy because so much of what I do is digital. And so hard copy I always have, I can always look at it, I can always refer to it, and I can look back on successes. So that's a big one. Once you have this testing process, sometimes I'm not saying use context, try context in all things, try these things, see if they actually work for you. But once it's together and once you have it working, use it to refine your thinking. The point of holistic context isn't to have holistic context, it's to think and manage your life holistically. Well, if I take this on, I'm going to have to do this or that or all the rest of it. So part of it is actually just having that process come into play. And then as that comes into being, you can then improve the conversation that you're having with yourself and ensure that you're safeguarding yourself against really poor decisions. This year, I've had 2 colleagues call up and say, hey, I've got this great opportunity of land. I want to talk to you about it. And within 15 minutes, we've been able to surmise it's a really bad call for a number of reasons, but they got so emotionally charged with it that they were going to jump into it. So, the best way to ward yourself off of things that are nice to have or, oh, I'd love to do that, is to build a context based upon yourself, to build it in some expertise, so that way when you make the decisions and have the conversations, you have somebody who's going to hold you accountable. So many contexts I work with are just out to lunch. People want to save the planet when they realize they've been doing that. That's been the problem. And truthfully, the planet's going to do what the planet's going to do, because we can't change the hearts and minds of billions of people, and religious fanatics will do what they'll do. This is my own personal conversation. So I do everything I can within the sphere and the scope I can do. And that gives a lot of agency and urgency to what I do. So if you have any more questions about that, mate, feel free to throw down. I'm happy to come back to it if there was something else that you were interested in putting down there. And I've been changing the focus of my business, focusing more on garden restoration, and have gotten a great response. So I'm a bit scared about whether I can take on these new types of projects. Your statement, Javan, that we all freak out at first and then quickly say, okay, who can turn it to such? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no worries. And I don't know if there was a question in there, but if there was, let me know. I think it's great that you're starting to focus on garden restoration. The more that we can really get into the problems we love to solve, the longer our life will be. Mary Popova of Brain Pickings, great website, talks about the key to being interesting is being interested in your work. And it's really easy to see people who become embittered and frustrated and jaded with their work. And so I think that's a really important piece to come to bear. So yeah, thanks so much. Jessica, a bunch of questions, and they don't seem to be coming up in the chat. Does this one come up? Yes, Jessica, that one comes up. You may want to just try again. Or if there's a problem, you could always just send us a direct email. Although we only have 50 minutes left, so it's probably not going to be a big issue. All right, that's we're up to speed here, mate.
Okay, great. So we'll see if Jessica's is able to get another question in there in the chat. We definitely saw that one. So let me ask you, Javan. We're seeing that one, Jessica. We'll send an email. See that. So a lot of folks are coming to this program. We have a wide range of people. We have folks that are, already have businesses and are off and running. We have folks that are in the beginning stages of their businesses, and we have folks who haven't really started a business yet. They're just getting going, right? So it's kind of a wide, diverse realm of stuff. So let me ask you, for the folks who we've talked a lot about, I think we've talked a lot about a holistic context. We've talked a bit about some of the issues that come up during business and making decisions about clients and such. But I just want to touch, for those folks who are just starting out, they may not even have a business yet. What would be a couple clear strategies or actions that you would suggest somebody who's sort of trying to figure out what they're going to do? They don't have the business yet. They haven't niched yet. What would be a couple starting points for folks like that to help them, start to really root into some plan of action or generating their vision?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple ways to go about this. I think, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but everybody I've put through this process has been able to get into action pretty quickly and find out if this works for them. So, first and foremost, know your direction and know how you're going to navigate. And so if that's context and if that's decision making, great. Don't say you have a context, know how to create one, know how to use it, know how to make decisions, know how to spot check, know how to improve your thinking. If your thinking doesn't improve, the actions, the results in your life won't improve. That's basic. If your decisions don't improve, your destiny won't improve, because decisions equal destiny. We don't have a destiny that's been given to us. We've been given skills, traits, attributes that we can use. So that's a pretty important piece. Second, know who you are and dive into it. And if you are in a Western civilization situation, which I imagine most of your students are, this is one of the best times of year to do it. It's usually hearth and home. If you're up in Canada, there's not a lot of plowing going on here, at least in the interior, maybe where folks are on the coast, but there's a lot of time to actually reflect and say, what do I really want to do and who am I really? One of the assessments I help people with, which is separate and kind of leads people into some of the work I do, is the natural gifts assessment. Who am I essentially? And who am I essentially today? So I worked with a client recently and they found out that nature appreciation was at the top, but also helping and really serving people. And so while she was going down this designer route, when we said this, she goes, I actually really like hospitality. I really like serving. I like making great food. So she's just about to launch a private label preserves business, Savor the Source, right? Like really understanding that conversation. And it's been fascinating to watch because she really got the sense of who she was first. She had another business, but she got a sense, who am I? And that really propelled the way. And then know the opportunities in your area, know the problems you like to solve, because the problems you like to solve and the opportunities in your area let you know if you can do what you want to do in the area. If you want to be a cannabis consultant and you live in, oh geez, I don't think there's too many that have been legalized down the States. I bet you I could pick any and it'd be okay. Texas, going to be hard going because there's no populace. You're going to be waiting to catch that wave. I'm ahead of the future. Well, maybe like 20 years ahead. It's going to take a while. So really understanding the problems you really like to solve, I think that's one of the most important places. And then the question about weak link, like what's my weak links in my life currently? What's the weak link in my business currently? And are my efforts directed at the weak links, or are they directed at just, well, I want to be happier? I do something called a wheel assessment with a lot of clients, and it's a wheel and it's divided into a number of different sections. And in that, this is a cool piece about that, in doing that, you end up understanding the satisfaction and any specific level. 0 at the middle, 10 at the side, 0 to 10, and say community. How satisfied am I with my community right now? Or if it's a business design, how satisfied am I with my promotions, my sales funnel, my sales process itself, how I grind out the work, all the rest of it. Well, say you have a 2. So you have a 2 in promotion. Promotion's a 2. Well, if you move promotion from a 2 to a 3, that's an incredible amount of gain. Say it was 1. If you moved it from 1 to a 2, that's 100% improvement. More often than not, we do the things in our businesses that we like doing as opposed to the things that are weak links. And that becomes a pretty important piece.
Let me ask you, Javan, you said about solving, what are the problems I like to solve?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you brought up the example of the client who went into a food making business or something. So what if there's folks who say, well, I want to do ecological landscaping. I want to do it this particular way because it's, I value doing this good work for the earth. I think I can make a career and a living out of it. But when they go and ask themselves the question, what are the problems I want to solve? They find themselves talking about something totally different that they, that they don't see a way to monetize. So what about when we're thinking about business and holistic context, is there a point where we're separating out, like, if the problems I want to solve, if I can't find a way to make a business out of it, then I'm doing the best I can with a business? Or are we pivoting? Or, like, what comes up when the problem I want to solve is something to do with my kid's school, and like it's school and it's kids, and it's like, that's this, and I don't even know how to scratch the surface of getting in to make those changes at the school. But meanwhile, I need to start a business and I'm on this other path.
So what's the constant in the universe? The constant in the universe is change. And entropy, the grimmest of grim reapers, is always at our door, always. That's what the world is. It's an entropic system that continually pulls down higher orders of things to lower orders. So entropy is always working on your business. It's always working upon you. And so if you have stagnated, if you've stalled, you're actually degenerating than anything else. And so something here to keep in mind is that if you're not innovating, you're stagnating. If you're not actively improving, you're stagnating. So Eric, your question is a good one, because with a lack of direction, entropy is always going to be moving you in a backward conversation. So inherently, your business is going to change. Inherently, you're going to get good enough at what you do. If folks haven't seen the flow chart takes a look at skill and challenge. And if you're too far in the skill with not enough challenge, you get bored. And if you're too far in challenge without skill, you get frustrated. So being in the middle of that allows us to kind of bounce back and forth and make our merry little way as we go. So that means that when you're presented with these opportunities, it's about cultivating and keeping opportunities alive. And also realizing that at some point, Eric might have got to this place, you've designed so many urban landscapes, you're like, I'm good. You did take a diet on urban landscapes. They all end up the same, with variations, of course, but largely the same. So you're going to change. Part of it, again, front loading. You're going to change. Things are going to be different. And so when they are different, when you come up with something like, I've got this really good idea, or I want to work with my kid's family or my kid's school and work with the family there, that's a part of it, which means you come back to source, you come back to who you are and how you operate, you come back to context, and you go, great, I still want to be happy, I still want to drive, but now I've got this little itch that I need to scratch. And maybe that itch is there a place for me to do naturalized or natural playgrounds in schools? And as a student of mine, years ago found out, because as we were looking at her skill set, I was like, you gotta work with somebody who knows design, speaking to the city, you gotta talk to everybody in the public school system. And that's what they did. They created an incredible business about working with schools in the private and the public school system. So, part of it, Eric, is keeping the big mindset involved, knowing that change is coming. And when it comes, being like, great, what am I going to do with this? Because there's only two options. We can either take a look at something as being inherently negative or inherently positive. And everything is either skilling me up or it's on its way to skilling me up these days. I had a client recently, because I had a really large row of bad luck. And immediately after we had a grieving conversation and what they weren't able to do now, etc., we got directly into, okay, where's the benefit here? Where's the value? And this is really where the problem is the solution, which I think most of us have into it. So, part of it is recultivating this conversation of ourselves and ensuring we have a really good mindset to approach some of these bigger questions.
That's excellent. And it also made me think. It also made me think about that, to combine that coming back to source and to combine that with those contraction times of your business, and to remember that, apply that principle of permaculture to work within succession of evolution. And that it's not like, because you are identifying that need to pivot in your business, you're identifying that need to get to more alignment. It's not like you have to do it tomorrow and shut your current business down and start a new one. It's more like, what's that transitionary step? Can I start putting some energy towards what feels aligned? Yeah. And in my contraction moments of my business, maybe I can focus in more, and then I'll know when that right moment is to cut away the stuff that that isn't serving me anymore, or that I'm not feeling aligned with, and start moving towards the aligned path. So we have just a few minutes left, and I just want to, first off, just extend my huge gratitude to you, Javan, for spending this time with us. And I know that you're kind of on vacation, so you're taking time away from your vacation to be with us today. Hugely valuable, and I know that we'll be wanting to dive deeper into your work. And so, what are some ways that we can learn more about the work you do, the programs that you have running, and get more involved with what you have going on?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, mate. So there's a couple ways to get a hold of me and take a look at some of the work. If you're interested specifically in life design, I would say go to allpointslife.com. That'll direct you to wherever that's pointing these days. I'm building a new website for that specifically, but it'll show you some conversations, give you a bigger sense of all this work. If you're interested in the Verge Permaculture or the Regenerative Business Mentorship, you can go to Verge Permaculture /products /RBM, and you can take a look at that type of work. That's been a lot of fun from the business conversation, which really enjoyed the conversation there. I'll be running a holistic context online program come February. I think we're already half or 3/4 full. So if context is something you're keen on and you want to work with somebody and build that up, it was actually a private offer. So if folks are interested, just feel free to drop me a line. I'd be happy to walk you through what it looks like. And then, allpointsdesign.ca. I'm on Facebook. Feel free to friend me or drop a line. And I guess there actually is one more thing. I've put together a mailing list for life design and business, and just kind of sharing a number of the thoughts that I've found are useful for folks. And I'll just put that directly in the chat if folks are interested. And if you want to get really random emails from me, i.e. not very consistent, but I work on nutrient density as a prime motivator for everything I do. So it'll be as nutrient dense as possible. Be great to chat more with you folks at some time.
Excellent, Javan. Thank you so much. So everybody check out those links in the chat. We'll also post them in the mastermind group. And I will be live this Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll be going through module 1 and module 2 of the program, just kind of just getting more acquainted with it together, answer any questions that you have. We'll be kind of focusing on those first couple modules, but if you have other burning questions, we'll definitely take those. We'll be sending you the link to that chat tomorrow. And I hope you all are doing great with your businesses and your projects. I know we're moving into that slow contracted time, at least here in Northern California, as winter descends, and hopefully we get some rain. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And thank you again so much, Javan, for everything you shared with us, your deep wisdom and sharing so readily and being so available to us. And I'm sure that we will be chatting with you here again soon, I hope.
Thanks so much, everybody. All the best.
Good night.